contractor and I were stuck in the lift for the past 25 minutes or so. But we are here now. There is a job to be done. Let's get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hogan, just to recap and to summarize on what we touched on before the lunch adjournment, when you testified about Mr. Zuma saying that Mr. Gama is his choice, you recall? When you note the machine won't be able to take your answer. Do you recall? Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Now, during that interaction, you said that Mr. Zuma was aware that Mr. Gama was the subject of an investigation pertaining to serious procurement irregularities.
Yes.
And you conveyed to the ex-president that the board had underwent a very professional selection process and that Mr. Gama was the choice of the board, but despite that, he still insisted that it must be Mr. Gama and no one else.
Yes.
I think, didn't you say Mr. Gama instead of Mr. Maseko?
Yes.
Maseko, yeah.
I beg yours, Mr. Chair. Now, what I want to know from you is that when the candidacy of Mr. Gama was considered, did the board only consider the question of the pending the pending investigation, or were there other issues which made the board to persist that Mr.
Of its nomination subcommittee? It then discussed those matters and made its nomination and its recommendation of Mr. Maseko. Ms. Ramos then only introduced the update on the investigations of Mr. Gama after the board had made its decision. Now, Chair, the allegations of misconduct were initially centered on senior people, but not necessarily Mr. Gama at a certain point. Mr. Irwin had received a whistleblower's report and had referred it on.
And that was Mr. Irwin being the former minister.
The former minister, and had forwarded it on to ESCOM for investigation. That was related to the purchase of 50 locomotives. It was not immediately apparent that Mr. Gama, who was the CEO of Transnet Freight Rail that was doing the purchase, was implicated in any way. And let me say now, Mr. Gama was not ever found guilty of fraud. Okay. However, there were other senior managers who were found guilty of fraud and they were dismissed. Okay. So then another query had come up in the interim about a contract between General Nyanda Security Advisory Services and Transnet Freight Rail, a security contract that had been entered into that had certain anomalies, and that was also further investigated, and Mr. Gama's conduct in that matter also had to come under the spotlight. But the board at that stage, as I understand it, was not completely au fait of how Mr. Gama was centrally affected, a central player in this. And Ms. Ramos had the day before requested Transnet internal audit to provide an update. And that update is what we have from Transnet internal audit, which I think is C, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
We will be getting to it shortly, but
Which then starts to definitely identify Mr. Gama as one of the people who had to be investigated. So, yes, there was no sense at the time of the discussions that the reason why they were turning Mr. Gama down as a recommendation was more on capabilities. And let me stress here as well, Mr. Gama received very fine assessments, and he is considered, as is his fellow senior managers. They are considered, all of them, in terms of the assessments, got very good reports. But there were just certain aspects which, from the individual evaluations and whatever, made them not suitable to be the recommended appointment at this moment in time.
So if I understand your evidence correctly, you are saying to the chair that a number of factors were considered in relation to various issues, which were also considered by the board in relation to Mr. Gama.
That's correct.
Now, may I refer you to page 40? Just to round up this issue. You will see that on page 40, you have 4 unnumbered paragraphs. I need to direct your attention to the paragraph just before the heading Citizenship, Credit and Criminal. Can you see that heading? Can you see that paragraph?
On page 40?
Yes, 40. The fourth paragraph.
The fourth paragraph, yes,
Yeah,
okay.
the one that starts with, it says Mr. Maseko's preferred style
yes.
of problem solving is explorative and reflective when faced with unfamiliar or new business environment or industry. This indicates that in a new large organization like Transnet, he would benefit from an experienced mentor and coach who fully understand the complexity of the organization. Now, a question might be posed to say that if indeed Mr. Maseko was an excellent candidate, why would he still require a mentor when he is appointed at this large institution?
Mr. Maseko came not from within the ranks of Transnet, but from outside the ranks of Transnet. He had extensive experience in running a company that deals primarily with infrastructure and logistics and the movement of goods. And Transnet is a very complex organization, and anyone who came in as CEO from the outside would need a proper induction process. And my understanding of that is that he would undergo a comprehensive induction process, but that his managerial capabilities and his ability to assimilate and his managerial qualities overweighed any instance that he was just someone who wouldn't know what to do when he arrived.
Yes. Now, in paragraph 35 of your witness statement, you refer to persons and organizations that were vocal that Mr. Gama was the candidate of their choice. Could you please provide the context and detail to the contents of this paragraph?
Yes. During the course of all of these matters, the media began to carry stories that Mr. Gama was being sidelined in favor of a white candidate, Mr. Wells. And the Transnet chair had already met with me and asked if I could assist with media statements to set the record straight. There were other media reports that saying he was the preferred candidate or the second preferred candidate, the next on the list after Praveen Gordhan, and they were dealing with, it was often in Sunday newspapers. Later on, when Mr. Gama was suspended by Transnet, about a day before and in the following probably 10, 11, 12 days, several organizations issued very, very firm statements that Gama would become the CEO and that he was being sidelined. Should I continue with those, mentioning who they were?
Those media statements are the ones contained from page 95 to 113, am I correct? I intend to deal with them in due course. But I just want you to confirm whether are you referring to those media statements?
Okay, all right.
Are those the ones from page
Yes,
95?
it was those. It was in that
And they
order.
go up
And there
until
was
page
also-
113.
Yes, and then there was also two cabinet ministers, Minister Sipiwe Nyanda and Minister Jeff Radebe, also made very, very strong statements that Mr. Gama was being sidelined, that he would become the CEO, and that he was being persecuted like Mr. Zuma had been persecuted.
And those cabinet colleagues that you're referring to them are the ones that you are testifying about on a statement on paragraph 35. When you say that the problem was that President Zuma, two of my cabinet colleagues.
Correct.
So you are referring to Minister Jeff Radebe and
Sipiwe Nyanda.
Yes. May I refer you to Annexure C on page 46? Now, annexed to that letter, it's a document on the next page that is styled Summary Report by Transnet Internal Audit into Allegations Relating to Transnet Freight Rail. Now, could you please...
Before you proceed, Mr. Mukwena, is it more convenient for you to deal with those media statements later rather than now, seeing that she has just mentioned?
Yes,
names?
Mr. Chair, there's a context to
There's a
them.
context.
In terms of chronology, yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
The two documents that I've referred to you on page 46 and 47, could you please tell to us what do they relate to?
Okay. After having received the whistleblower reports at different times, Transnet Internal Audit was asked to investigate these. The first tender, which raised problems, was the 50 like new locomotives. That was a decision made by Transnet management, which government really agreed with, that certain locomotives could be refurbished in the interim until we purchased new. And the Transnet board, in agreeing that this particular company should get that contract, said that the refurbishment must take place in Transnet itself. At that stage, it was called Transvac or Transnet Rail Engineering. That is one of the divisions of Transnet. And Transnet wanted to up its ability to build, maintain, refurbish locomotives instead of constantly trying to outsource. Government's intention was also that government does not, and this was an initiative between public enterprises and trade and industry, that we look very much at creating such a manufacturing capability in South Africa rather than importing rail stock from abroad. Also, South Africa always had that kind of rail manufacturing capability. Union Carriageway down in Dunator was a private sector one, and Transnet had it. So the expenditure on refurbishing this was meant to advantage South Africa's manufacturing capability and to provide jobs. So Transnet Board passed a resolution to say that this contract, the work must be done in-house, only to find out later that Mr. Gama had signed off the contract with no reference to that it should be in-house, and only to find out later that the company, which had an international component, an American component, as I remember, was a local component, had started such a facility near to Pretoria and was already investing and building it up. And Transnet had to now roll that back, and they had to go to the United States. There was a lot of things. Transnet had to pay a penalty. All sorts of matters arose out of those kind of complications. So that, what we have here is that this was a matter that Transnet internal audit was investigating, and they say here that the contract that was signed did not take into account, and that's on page 48, and it's the third bullet from the bottom. The contract signed by Mr. Gama did not take into account the resolution passed by the Board of Directors.
Now, if I may refer to page 49, under the heading Conclusions.
Yes, on page?
49.
No, yes. So the conclusion at that stage, 49, in terms of Transnet internal audit, was that the signatories of the contract did not comply fully with the board or the director's resolution, and consequently disciplinary action must be taken against the relevant signatories to the agreement. The presiding officer of a disciplinary hearing should take into consideration the implications to Transnet of the non-compliance and the resultant additional costs to Transnet in determining the appropriate sanction.
Yes, and you're saying that Mr. Gama was the one that also signed the contract?
Yes. Now, Mr. Gama was not in control of the tender board. You know, Transnet had a whole series of boards from different divisions and whatever. But as the general manager of Transnet Freight Rail, it was his job to sign off on the contract. And he gave evidence that he hadn't, you know, he was under pressure and he quickly signed it. He hadn't really read it through because he was more or less aware of the contents. Yes, that was that one.
Now, you also make reference in your statement to one Mr. Wells.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mukwena. So this, the time of this letter and report from the Transnet's internal audit section was happening in March 2009.
Yes.
Before your time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
You also make reference to Mr. Wells in your statement, Ms. Hogan. How did he feature in this saga of Mr. Gama?
Mr. Wells was the acting CEO, and he was instructed by the board to initiate proceedings and whatever. I'm not exactly sure the details are here, but as I understand it, he then handed it over to the head of human resources to manage. And that was a process that then went ahead. Mr. Wells faced a tirade of insults. It was a fusillade of insults, racist comments, accusations that he was trying to thwart the progress of a very good black manager. As I've said before, partly because he wanted the job, that it was alleged that he wanted the job himself, which was not true. Those accusations never ever stopped. Even into the disciplinary hearing, the person who conducted the arbitration hearings at that point listed the number of accusations that were laid against Mr. Well that proved not to be true. And they are they are not nice accusations. They are actually, our country has gone into a mode of destroying people in the public domain, and it was that kind of thing. And in that very disciplinary hearing, Mr. Gama was found guilty of the way that he criticized, the manner in which he criticized the Transnet executives, and Mr. Wells in particular, and he said he would apologize.
Yes. May I?
But I'm sorry, Mr. Mkwena. As at March 2009, when the Transnet Internal Audit Section made this report, Mr. Wells had actually withdrawn his candidature a few months before, in December, is that right?
Correct, in December 2008.
So when Mr. Gama was charged with allegations arising out of this investigation by the Transnet Internal Audit Section, he was no longer an interested party in terms of the position, Mr. Wells.
Yes, he was no longer an interested party.
May I refer you to page 53, Annexure D? Could you please identify that document for us?
This was the document which I gave and went through with to the President at the end of July 2009. As you would recall, Chair, I had undertaken to come back with more information to the President relating to the appointment of Mr. Maseko. As you will see in the document, I took quite extensive legal advice on this matter, and a lot of research was done. And this I gave to President Zuma, and I went through it.
Before that, Ms. Hogan, you also set out the purpose of this document on paragraph 1.1 to 1.5. And I think that those issues are quite important, which you conveyed to the President. Could you please read them into the record?
Yes. Yes.
Could you please read them into the record?
If there was?
Could you please read the paragraph 1.1 to 1.5?
It was to brief the President on the following matters. 1.1, the legal framework governing the appointment of a group Chief Executive Officer for Transnet Limited. 2, the CEO and the recruitment and selection process undertaken by Transnet Board of Directors to employ a CEO. 3, investigations into allegations of corruption at Transnet impacting one of the candidates for the position of a CEO. 4, assessment of the recruitment and selection process by the board. 5, the recommended process forward and the risks involved in the appointment of the CEO. That was the content of that.
So already in 2009, long before this Commission of Inquiry, as per 1.3, there were already those issues pertaining to the allegations of corruption at Transnet, as you have indicated in that paragraph.
Yes.
Now, what I want to know, Ms. Hogan, you then had a meeting with the ex-president and also provided him with this detailed memorandum. Did you
Yes, I did.
Did you take the president through this document?
Did I?
Did you take the president through this document?
Yes.
And what was his reaction?
I'm sorry, before that, when was that meeting?
It was towards the, this document is dated the 28th of July, so it must have been within a week of that. You see, I was approaching the president because the process for appointing the CEO had been halted. We had to then postpone the AGM of Transnet. And I was wanting the president, this document comes with a recommendation that Sipho Maseko be appointed. And so it must have been between the date of his document, the 27th of July, and the 11th of August, when the Transnet when the Transnet AGM took place.
And this meeting that you are talking about now, between yourself and the president, where you took him through this document, this memorandum of 28 July 2009, that was then a second meeting that you had with the president on the issue of the appointment of the CEO for Transnet.
Correct.
The first one having been about a month or so after your appointment as Minister of Public Enterprises.
Correct.
So that a month or so would have been early June 2009, is that right? I think you were appointed
Yes.
about 10 May
Yeah.
or 11 May.
June,
Yeah.
yes.
So the first meeting, your first meeting with him in regard to this issue would have been around early June.
I think I
Or
give
towards
the date.
mid-June.
I think I give the yes, it was towards I say approximately a month after my appointment, so
Yes.
June
So
sometime.
that would be somewhere in the first half of June.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
To clarify the chair's questions, if you can go to page 9, just to paint in the chronology, paragraph 33, that's where you talk about the first meeting,
Yes.
and you see that it's approximately a month after my appointment.
Yeah.
Now, if you may refer back to Annexure D, page 53.
Page
5.3.
5.3, okay. Yes.
You have outlined the topics which are dealt with in this memorandum on paragraph 1.1 to 1.5.
Yes.
And I take it that from, if one peruses this document, one will find these issues being ventilated at great length.
Yes.
And this is what the president had in his position when you were trying to convey to him the importance of appointing Mr. Maseko.
Correct.
Now, just to clear one of the issues where there might be a lacuna in terms of your documents, could you explain to the chair whether at the time when you were preparing your statement, did you have all the necessary documents that you required?
Yes, I did.
You did. Did you receive all the emails that you required from your previous office?
I did, but there was a problem. I wrote an official letter to Minister Gordon requesting access to my documents in order to prepare the statement.
I'm sorry, to Minister?
Gordon, because he's the Minister of Public Enterprises now. So I requested access to documents in order to prepare. They were able to assist me, and he assigned an advocate in his department to assist me, and I signed off, and they signed off that these were copies. But it was evident that my papers had been quite considerably tampered with. And also we could find no record of my emails. It seemed that they'd been deleted from my time, and maybe a little later, from the server of the Department of Public Enterprises. So I did have to reconstruct, as best as I could, some of these documents and my understanding. I spent a lot of time doing that, just to make sure that that it was solid.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we were still dealing with Annexure D on page 53. You have also testified about your second meeting with the ex-president. Now, what I want to know is that after that meeting, or during that meeting, what was the reaction of the president?
Or maybe before that, could you give me the main features of this document that you presented?
The
main features. Yeah,
okay.
main points.
Okay.
In other words, you don't need to say everything,
Yes.
but what you consider were the main points that the memorandum contained, which obviously you probably mentioned to the former president.
Yeah. The main points was firstly the legal framework regarding the appointment of a group CEO for Transnet that's founded in the Transnet founding documents. And
that briefly was just to...
Okay, I'll go through it here. I'm talking to page 55. It says here the Transnet's Articles of Association do provide specifically for the appointment of the board and the CEO. Articles 69 and 71 vest the power to appoint the CEO with the shareholder, the minister, in a general meeting. Article 69 specifically addresses the appointment of executive directors, that is the CEO, the CFO, and any other executive director, while Article 71 deals with the non-executive directors. And so I was giving who has executive authority to appoint. That was one of the matters, because I thought the president did not understand that kind of component or was not agreeing with it. Then I went through the CEO recruitment and selection process, as I've done with you, how thorough, what it was about, what the competencies we needed.
Effectively in the same way you have explained.
Done it with yourself,
yeah.
yes.
That you explained to him as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also dealt with the investigation into the issues of corruption. And I gave him the details of of both instances, the 50 like new and the security contract which had been given to Minister Nyanda's company. Let me say, Minister Nyanda was no longer, when he became a cabinet minister, he then moved out of that company, but at the time he had been a member. So I gave the president details of all of that. I also informed him of the legal onus on the board to take action when such instances of misconduct do occur, and that it wasn't the board's decision to make to follow up. It was actually a legal requirement. And so that was followed up with him. And then I repeated my recommendation that he notes the contents of this memorandum and approves the submission of a cabinet memorandum recommending the appointment. Now, I want to be very clear. I wasn't asking the president to approve Mr. Maseko. I was asking him to approve a cabinet memorandum recommending the appointment. Now, as I've said to you before, the cabinet memorandums go through a subcommittee of cabinet and then go to cabinet. When a minister is under pressure, and it's an important issue, the minister can write a letter to the president explaining why the minister would prefer to bypass the subcommittee process because of certain exigencies. And the president is then empowered to grant the minister to place that on the agenda. And that's what I was referring to, because it was already getting very late for the board.
So the approval that you were seeking from the former president was an approval of bypassing the subcommittee of cabinet in regard to this memorandum and going straight to cabinet.
My recommendation says that. Well, not to. It just says approves the submission of a cabinet memorandum. I didn't go into details of which process.
So, but what I mean is the approval you wanted related to the process, to the procedure.
Yes, to procedures.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It was because Advocate Trengrove had advised very strongly, and others as well, that you should not be asking for approval. You should be consulting with.
I think Mr. Mkwena's question before mine was therefore what the former president's reaction was to your recommendation at that meeting.
Yes.
He said he would come back to me.
Now, may I refer you to Annexure E, page 94?
And maybe before you go there, at your first meeting with the former president on this issue, had you left him with documentation relating to the issue that he could have looked at after your meeting, or not really?
Yes, I left him. The problem with meeting was in virtually every instance of meeting with the president is that there was never an aide present. My experience with President Motlanthe previously, when I was Minister of Health, is that if there was something very important that you had to discuss, not just something quickly that you put pass by him, you would request that meeting. On occasions, the President's office would contact the DG or someone and say, what is this about? And, there would be various things. But in most instances, in virtually all those instances when he was President, there would be an aide taking a record of that decision. With President Zuma, there wasn't that. You met at his house. It was, the housekeeper sometimes would organize the meetings. There wasn't a professionalism there.
I was referring you to Annex E on page 94. Mm-hmm. Now, you had told the chair that when we testified about Annex D, that you had a meeting with the ex-president, Mr. Zuma. You left him with that document. You took him through that document. And he said he will revert to you. Am I correct?
Correct.
Now, can you tell us, identify for us Annex E and tell us what was the purpose of you dispatching this letter to the president?
So, having not heard from the President and knowing that I had to get within the cabinet cycle, I then formally addressed a letter to the President requesting permission for the late and direct submission of the cabinet memorandum, and therefore for the appointment of Mr. Maseko.
Now, in terms of the dates, I know I'll give you the opportunity to proceed with that evidence. We know that Annex D is dated the 28th of July 2009, Annex D, and Annex E, it's now dated the 25th of August 2009. Almost a period of a month has lapsed without you hearing from the ex-president.
Yes.
Yes, you can now proceed dealing with Annex E.
Yeah. So I then request the President's permission because I'd not heard. I'd requested that I put it before Cabinet. I had not heard from him. So I did the formal request, which you're supposed to do as a minister. And I think I spoke telephonically. I can't remember. All I have is that this memo was then withdrawn from the Cabinet agenda. And the President then said he wanted several names, not only for the CEO position, but he wanted several names for the chairperson.
Now, do you know who withdrew the memorandum from Cabinet?
This memo, who wrote this?
Who withdrew the memorandum?
The Cabinet Secretariat were instructed to withdraw the memorandum. And they said the President had given that instruction.
Oh, yes. And you said that the President wanted several names of what?
For the chairperson of the board. I had not requested anything yet to put forward a memorandum on the chairperson, but the President now wanted 3 names for the chairperson of the board.
Would this have been around August now?
28th of August. Yeah, oh, yes. The formal request I put through was on the 28th of August.
And had Mr. Paswana left the Transnet board at that stage?
He had left at the end of July.
Oh, okay, all right. But the point you make is that you had not yet approached the President about the filling of that vacant position.
Yes. I surmise that what I'd said to him, that it was important to have appointments, is that there was now an acting chair, acting CFO, acting group CEO, acting CEO of Freight Rail, and that might have been the context. I can't exactly remember. But he now wanted me to give him 3 names so he could decide.
Now, you dispatch Annexure E to the President. Did he react to this letter?
And, he did in the sense that the memo was withdrawn from Cabinet. It did not serve at Cabinet, the recommendation.
Did you find any opportunity to address the Cabinet on the issue of the issues that you wanted to raise, that you have raised with the President?
I could not raise that issue following on this until Mr. Gama's disciplinary proceedings were completed, and they were only finished in June when he was dismissed from Transnet in June 2010. It was almost a year later. So Transnet was left completely vulnerable with acting positions all the way through.
Now, were you consulted in any way about the withdrawal of the memorandum from Cabinet?
No. The President, what I surmise is that the President said, this is not going through. I want now you to add 3 more names for chairperson.
But as at the date when that happened, he had not come back to you on the documentation you had submitted to him in July.
No, he had not.
Thank you.
Now, on paragraph 44, page 12.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mokoena. The 3 names that the former president was asking for, were those exclusively for the position of chairperson of the board, Transit Board, or did he also mean he wanted other names for the position of CEO as well?
No, he was then talking about the chairperson of the board.
As at that time, what was your understanding of the president's position on the issue of CEO, Group CEO for Transnet? Was it that he wanted the search for a CEO to be put in abeyance until the disciplinary process relating to Mr. Gama was finished, at which stage then all relevant candidates could be considered and a choice be made? Or were your understanding that whatever happened, Mr. Gama was the one to be appointed at the end of that process if he was not dismissed as a result of the process? What was your understanding?
That Mr. Gama must be appointed.
And your understanding that that was his position, did it ever change at any stage while you were Minister of Public Enterprises?
No.
It didn't.
Mm-mm.
Was there any time when you did ask whether the former president had any problem with the candidate recommended by the board? In other words, did you get a chance to say, Mr. President, do you have any particular problem with this candidate who has been recommended by the board? And maybe if you did, what was the answer?
The answer was that Mr. Gama has been persecuted.
So you did get a chance to
Oh, yes,
to
when
ask
I
that,
briefed
yeah.
him the first time and the second time.
Yes.
But he was not prepared to discuss the merits of Mr. Maseko.
Yes.
He simply wanted Mr. Gama appointed.
So he didn't articulate any criticism of Mr. Masego's capabilities or experience or knowledge?
No.
Okay.
And Mr. Maseko then withdrew as a candidate in September.
Yes,
thank you.
Ms. Hogan, just for completeness so that we don't leave the chair behind, may I refer to page 10, paragraph 34. And in that paragraph, you address the questions that were now put by the chair in order to clarify your evidence. You answer as follows. You are saying in a statement, I was shocked and disappointed when President Zuma informed me that he was adamant that Mr. Gama was his only choice for the group CEO. I informed him that that was not possible and that Mr. Gama was not the board's choice, and I could not override the board as they had undergone a very professional selection process. I further informed President Zuma that Mr. Gama was the subject of an inquiry into procurement irregularities, and it would be very messy to appoint a group CEO who could potentially be facing fairly serious charges. And fundamentally, you say, President Zuma said that if that was my view, no appointment whatsoever was to be made at Transnet until Mr. Gama's disciplinary process was over. We agreed that I would provide him with more detailed information for him to further apply his mind. So there was no doubt in the ex-president's mind as to whom he wanted as the group CEO.
Yes.
Despite everything else that you have conveyed to him.
Yes.
Was there an appreciation on your part that if you were the appointing authority in respect of the CEO and there were a number of candidates and the board had recommended a certain candidate, that if you appointed another candidate, you would, as a matter of law, be required to be able to justify why you chose a particular candidate and not another candidate? You had that appreciation.
Exactly.
Yes, and that you would need to be able to defend your decision.
Yes, I was aware of that. And for me, it was really important that a board has confidence in a CEO, otherwise it's just not going to work. And yes, it was not for me now to go looking around for another candidate who they had said they would prefer not to appoint at that point in time. Sorry, yeah.
No. Continue.
No, that's...
From what you say, it seems that you were not given anything, even if you may have been open to appointing somebody else other than Mr. Masego. You were not given any grounds as to why Mr. Gama was or would have been a better candidate than Mr. Masego.
I was given no grounds, and what I learned from this experience and from what the President had said is that I would not be able to put before Cabinet any proposal relating to Transnet going forward, apart from submitting a very dubious memorandum nominating 3 names for Cabinet or the President to decide, which I was advised was usurping an executive authority. And I, quite frankly, had started to become alarmed at, and I didn't understand it, what the underlying motives must be for all of this. What was the interest in just one particular candidate? And what was the interest in a chair then that seemed to go beyond just the interests of Transnet as a company?
Did you get to know whether the former president also had an appreciation that whoever was chosen as the CEO, that decision would need to be a decision that could be justifiable in terms of why choose this one and not that one? Did you get to know whether he appreciated that that was required?
You know, no, I couldn't get a sense that he appreciated that you have to be able to apply your mind and justify what decisions you make as an executive authority. It was almost like he still saw himself in the ANC as issuing instructions to, one of your executive members, or, that you're in charge of the show and you tell people what they must do. He almost had that approach.
Thank you.
Ms. Hogan, I was referring you to page 12 of your witness statement, with particular reference to paragraph 44. You say in paragraph 44, Mr. Gama was formally charged by Transnet and later suspended on 1st September 2009. Immediately before and in the days following his suspension, Minister Jeff Radebe, Gama, in quotes, Gama will become CEO. Minister Spiwe Nyanda, in quotes, Gama is being persecuted like Jacob Zuma. And also ANC, the SACP, the South African Transport Union, and ANC Youth League, under Julius Malema at the time, all issued strong and harsh statements in support of Gama, accusing Transnet of persecuting him. This was reflected in numerous statements and reports in the media, which I attach here to marked F1 to F13. I need to explore with you some of those media reports in order for us to be able to appreciate the influence and the pressure which you say was exerted upon you at the time in relation to this issue. May I then refer you to page 95.
What page? 95?
95, Chair. I'm tempted to come there. Now, let's start with the one on page 95, headed ANC backs suspended Transnet boss, dated the 30 August 2009 from the Sunday Times. And if you can read that article and you can react or comment on it.
I'll just read extracts. This was an article which appeared in the Sunday Times a day or two before Mr. Gama was suspended. And all of these statements occurred as Mr. Gama was suspended. Minister Jeff Radebe described his suspension as a miscarriage of justice. That's the first paragraph.
Yes. And if you can also comment on the last paragraph that says Gama is believed.
Then various falsehoods were put out. Gama is believed to be among at least 3 candidates shortlisted to take over as a permanent CEO. He was shortlisted, but he was not the person recommended. So it's an innuendo rather than a blatant distortion.
And that must be viewed in the light of your evidence before the chair today, when you told us about the individuals that were shortlisted, and you also commented on the credentials of Mr. Maseko and the other issues that were taken into account in relation to Mr. Gama.
Yes, indeed.
Proceed.
And then it says the Sunday Times can also reveal that the National Working Committee instructed Minister of Public Enterprises, Barbara Hogan, about 2 months ago to appoint Gama as Transnet's CEO after the departure of the parastatal's former head, Maria Ramos, had left, who had joined APSA. Now, I had never received an instruction from the ANC's National Working Committee. It's insightful to look at who was on that committee at that stage. Many of them were people who had backed President Zuma in his campaign to be president of the ANC. They were his firm supporters and backers, with very few exceptions, on that National Working Committee.
Now, can you turn over to page 9-6? You can ignore the first portion unless you want to comment on it, but I'm much more interested in the second portion that appears in quotes, that says in other words. If you can read and react to it.
Yes. Now, this was a quote from Brian Sokotu, who was the media's ANC spokesman. And he was saying, saying that Gama was an executive who's been around Transnet. In other words, we say he has a track record. I'm not aware of discussions about him at the NWC or the NEC level, but there's nothing stopping members of the ANC from discussing succession within parastatals. Now, you can discuss, do you instruct? Why are you discussing? Those are the questions that one needs answered.
And then the following that says, speaking at the University of KwaZulu-Natal on Thursday, Radebe denounced the Transnet board and described the decision to suspend Gama as gross injustice. You have already testified about that. Yes. Now, if you go towards the bottom of the same page, starting with the words, according to NWC insiders, Gama was recommended by the party's deployment committee. Do you wish to comment on that?
It may well have been, but that was never drawn to my attention, that Gama was recommended by the deployment committee.
Yes. Turn over to page 9-7. You can read from where it says both men, and you can comment thereafter.
Well, this is misleading because it says both men were recommended. Only one person was recommended, not both men.
And this is in line with your testimony corroborated by the documents which I referred to today, that there was only one recommendation. One recommended person all the way through. May I refer you to page 98? So while you're still on page 97, the sixth line that starts with an ANC deployment committee, if you can read there and comment. 97.
97, sorry, I thought it was 98.
97.
And ANC
I think it's the 6th line.
was also, I don't know, I have no knowledge of who opposed Gama, that person.
Yes. Now, may I refer you to page 98? You can read the first and the last paragraphs and comment on them.
This is now the ANC Youth League. So the first, one of the media statements is on the 30th. The ANC Youth League issues a statement on September the 11th saying the African National Congress Youth League calls for the immediate appointment of Siyabonga Gama as the Group CEO of Transnet. There is evidently a concerted agenda by the predominantly white board of directors and external role players to isolate Siyabonga Gama from Transnet and deny him the position of Group CEO of Transnet despite his credentials. Currently, Africans are denied positions of responsibility in key and strategic sectors of the economy, and we should never egg walk around this absolute reality. And then it goes on to say, Siyabonga Gama should be appointed as a Group CEO and business go on as usual in Transnet. Any attempt to persecute and isolate him will be met with massive resistance from the youth of South Africa.
And these are some of the pressure that you see it was exerted upon you at the time,
Yeah.
and the board.
And the board, yes.
Now, may I refer you to page 101? You can identify that document, read it, and you can also comment on it.
Now, this is the South African Communist Party releasing a statement a couple of days before the ANC Youth League on the 7th of September, saying that this is a statement, the SACP has noted the recent developments within Transnet and the subsequent suspension of Siyabonga Gama. We wish to express serious concerns about what appears to be an attempt by certain elements within and outside of Transnet to clearly frustrate the appointment of Mr. Gama as a CEO, despite his illustrious career, commitment to public service, and strong credentials.
Let's go to page 101.
That is so.
That's the same
it's
thing,
a
yes.
duplicate, yeah.
It's a duplicate. I didn't see. Page 108. It's headed Gama being persecuted like Zuma. Are you there?
I'm just allocating it, 107. This is on September the 13th in the Sunday Times business page, and the quote is, Gama being persecuted like Zuma. Minister of Communications and ANC heavyweight, General Siphiwe Nyanda, says suspended Transnet executive Siyabonga Gama is being persecuted in the same manner as Jacob Zuma. He's a young man. Very few people are as capable or as suitable as he is. The challenge is that some people out there are really bent on ensuring that he is destroyed. What happened to Jacob Zuma, to Jay-Z, is happening in this case. People vilify and cast aspersions on you.
The last one on page 113.
This is from the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union. It was issued by the General Secretary, Randall Howard. Sitawu has become aware of the suspension of Gama effected on the 1st of September. Sitawu is convinced that the suspension is informed by a dirty tricks campaign.
You are reading the one on Annexure G, 111, isn't it?
On 111.
Yes, okay, proceed.
Yes, yeah. Is a dirty campaign to discredit him publicly and rule him out as the most suitable candidate. We also question the timing of the charges. And then it goes on, Sitawu is reliably informed that the Carlton Centre cabal, and how often are we hearing that word cabal, that the Carlton Centre cabal, led by the acting GCEO, Chris Wells, with a direct link to former GCEO Maria Ramos, is hell-bent on ensuring that Gama does not get that job. And it goes on and on. Sitawu, and then at the end here, the last paragraph, Sitawu will ensure that no puppet appointment takes place until the disciplinary process of Gama is completed, even though at the cost of keeping the untransformed cabal in place a little longer. And, you know, that is the tone of it. Might I just say that COSATU, as a federation, never once engaged publicly on this matter. I had briefed Zwelinzima Vavi, and he concurred with me that there were, you know, this issue was problematic. So although the Transport Union, who, you know, have members in Transnet, issued a statement, COSATU was the one part of the tripartite alliance that did not follow suit as the others had done.
And we have also Annexure H on 113. This also captures the history, and it's captured, it's headed middling with Transnet matters.
Yes. This is an editorial
Yes.
of the City Press of September the 13th, 2009, headed, as you say, meddling with Transnet matters. It starts off with saying, the level of political interference at Transnet does not bode well for the effective management of parastatals. At last count, the presidency, the ANC headquarters, Minister Jeff Radebe, the ANC Youth League, and the Trade Union Federation, when that is incorrect, it was just Sitawu, had all insisted that the Transnet board appoint suspended executive Siyabonga Gama as the chief executive. It is an unprecedented level of political pressure exercised on what is supposed to be a board appointed by government, but which operates with autonomy and respect for its professionalism and its expertise. And then it starts to speculate what is at stake here. Obviously, certain business associations with Minister Radebe, whatever, I won't go into those. But it ends off by saying, and that's the third paragraph from the bottom, the question of who is right or wrong is really not for the ANC to determine. Neither is it terribly good practice to level the race card at the board and the executive team at Transnet. The board is diverse, and its non-executive directors include Christine Ramon, Nunu Nchingila, and Peter Moyle. Their reputations are being sullied, and it will be little surprise if they walk in the next week. Also in a tight spot is Public Enterprises Minister Barbara Hogan, who has to make the nomination of the Transnet Chief Executive to Cabinet. Caught between her party and the board, she is damned if she does and damned if she doesn't.
Do you wish to comment on that?
Very true. I have not included how, in later times, during this period, the kind of newspaper articles that were produced, allegedly quoting insiders, people in the know, all of those. Besides myself, Mr. Wells was also targeted, the Transnet board. As regards to myself, there were often headline stories in a particular Sunday newspaper which said I did not have the confidence of the cabinet, that I must go, that I'm going to be taken out. And it was, nothing related to what my experience was. But how I experienced that was an enormous amount of pressure being put on me publicly to accede to what whoever was doing this, to accede to their demands. There was a point at which I was informed that certain members of senior black management of Transnet would walk out if Mr. Gama was appointed. Now, Chair, this is a company. This is not a two-bit little show. This is a company that's extremely important for the country. I counted no less 18 times in 6 months that the Transnet board tried to engage government, myself, my predecessors. They even went to President Motlanthe, Deputy President Motlanthe, to make a decision about the board and the CEO. Would any shareholder withhold and postpone and not appoint a board for not appoint these critical positions for over a year? No. How are we treating senior professional people who we've appointed to a board and treat them as though they are part of a conspiracy to do whatever is evil and wrong and against transformation? That board, majority was black, very fine people, and yet they were castigated. Yet, and you can see here that some of them were already talking to the media and saying, this is ruining me, my reputation. I will have to move on. And in fact, 4 did resign. And to the credit of others, they stayed on, and to the credit of the people who were in the acting positions, who often had to be in the firing line non-stop, they stayed on. It is unacceptable. And that is why I do feel that this commission does need to look at the issues of how boards are appointed, what level of autonomy, what level of professionalism engaged, and how we respect people. But it's not only boards. There's a person like Sipho Maseko. He is already running a major parastatal. The share price has shot up since he took over. What are we saying to Sipho Maseko, a completely competent manager who's come flying through the tests, that is not good enough because for some reason the ANC doesn't see him as one of them? Not that he's, I'm not saying not as one of them as a member, but somehow refuses to respect him as a person. And this went on time and time again. This notion that there's an in-house and there's an out-house, and the way to pursue your career is to walk a beaten path to Luthuli House and ingratiate yourself with the party. And I do think we need to look at that relationship between the state and the party, and the way that people are being mobilized to spread falsehoods and defamation.
To your knowledge, as at that time, had it ever happened that in regard to the appointment of a CEO of a parastatal SOE, members of cabinet should go out publicly and make the kinds of statements that I understand were made by some of your cabinet colleagues in regard to another colleague's portfolio?
You know, it's unheard of that you would implicitly attack another cabinet colleague, insist on the decision that you can criticize a cabinet colleague and say, well, you know, there's within bounds, but you know, I don't agree or whatever, or I have reservations. But to say this cabinet colleague will appoint Gama, appoint someone. In fact, the matter was taken to the public protector at the time. The public protector ruled, in the case of Minister Nyanda, that he had contravened the Executive Ethics Act in that he had leveraged his position as a minister to benefit people who were close or whatever. And the president was told that he had to reprimand Minister Nyanda, and when asked in Parliament whether he had reprimanded Minister Nyanda, he simply said, yes, I've reprimanded him. Yes, it's you know, I remember several cabinet ministers coming to me and saying they were shocked at the way that fellow cabinet ministers were going out into the public domain. Neither of them ever spoke to me, but went out into the public domain and were, you know, lobbying. And that's the only word you can say, lobbying for a candidate.
Do you know whether those cabinet colleagues of yours, as well as all the other organizations or people who are referred to in the newspaper articles that you have referred to, whether they were aware that there was a selection process that had to be followed, that had been followed by the board, a board, as you say, that was, the majority of whom were black, and that there was a black candidate who had been recommended. Did you know whether they were all aware of this, or were there just some stories told that suggested that it was either Mr. Gama and a white candidate?
Not
necessarily.
I'm not party to the knowledge,
that
but
if it was a white candidate, it would be justified. But I'm just looking at some of the things I've read, which some of the people seem to use to justify why they said it should be Mr. Gama.
The Deputy Minister, Enoch Godongwana, often had to be at Luthuli House because he was chairing the Economics Transformation Subcommittee, and would engage there, you know, in an informal basis. He was of the same view as I held. We both met with the Secretary General of the ANC. We wanted to know why he was insisting on Gama. We explained all of this, and he was absolutely adamant that Gama was being persecuted and that they would not accept anyone else but Gama. Whereas
Even after you had
Even
told
after
him
I
about
explained it.
Maseko and his credentials
Yes.
and so on?
Oh, yes, oh, yes. As I say, I had spoken to Deputy President Motlanthe, and he agreed with me. And I'd also briefed Zwelinzima Vavi as part of the Tripartite Alliance, and he also agreed with me. But from within the ANC, it was absolutely Gama or no one else. And I must take into consideration that perhaps they did genuinely believe that he was being persecuted. But then when presented with not evidence, but the full story, you should then at least realize that there's a bigger story here. And I was disappointed that they didn't realize that.
I can understand an attitude that says there's a certain candidate who is being unfairly excluded from the process, an attitude that says something must be done to make sure that there's a fair process which allows everyone who is eligible to compete. That's obviously different from saying it doesn't matter what process is followed, it should be so and so. That's different. But
Yes.
I would, it would be surprising if people in senior positions, whether in government or in organizations, in a process which by law is required to be fair, were to basically say we don't care about the merits or demerits of other candidates, it should be so and so. Because from what you say, it seems to me that that's the effect of what you are saying was the former president's attitude. And you must tell me if I'm wrong. That seems to be the effect of what you are saying was the then Secretary General's attitude as well. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, look, the Secretary General would endorse a fair process of a disciplinary process. But it was my impression that he believed that Siyabonga Gama would prove himself completely innocent in this.
Okay, I think it's important to appreciate nuances here. You might be bringing in a nuance that is important. It was your understanding that as far as the Secretary General was concerned, he wanted there to be a fair process that would include Gama, but that if Gama was appointed, he should be appointed through a fair process when other people compete.
No, that the disciplinary process would be a fair process.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
and so don't appoint anyone until that disciplinary process is over.
Yes, but after that disciplinary process, what your understanding was that he was saying that Gama should be appointed,
Yes.
not that there must still be competition.
No, Gama must
Yes.
then be the candidate, yes.
And like the former president, he also didn't have any criticism for Mr. Masego's credentials.
No.
Thank you.
Ms. Hogan, I have referred you to a number of media articles and you have commented on them. Can I find out from you whether did you react at all to all these statements that were that I've actually taken you through? Did you have a chance to comment on them?
I did not comment. I felt a lot of this was fake news. It was clearly a lobby. And it would have been undignified and counterproductive to go out in the public domain and have public slanging matches with people.
Now, those media articles or reports are attributed to a number of individuals and organizations. You know, some of them were ministers at the time, Mr. Jeff Khadebe, Spiwe Nyanda, and it refers to the ANC Youth League, and the list goes on. Do you know whether those individuals or the entities, did they ever deny what was attributed to them to them in those articles?
Not to my knowledge. To the President's, you know, when the President, can I just say one thing? When the President was questioned by reporters at one stage, journalists, whether it was correct that Sipiwe and that other ministers get involved in this, the President said no, they should not be involving themselves in this. So he also appreciated that they'd gone out of their mandate.
So you must have been under enormous pressure to appoint Mr. Gama at the end of his disciplinary process. Maybe the outcome made things a little easier for you, but you must have been under extreme pressure.
I was under extreme pressure. I had to attend National Executive Committee meetings, not National Executive Committees, but NECs and meetings of the Tripartite Alliance. And some people were very, very nasty to me at those meetings. Not that I can't take that. And what really offended me was that I was cast as an anti-transformation racist who did not appreciate the necessity for transformation in this country. And that really offended me. I expected better from my colleagues who knew my history. Jeff Khadebe was the General Secretary of the ANC, I think the Southern Natal region, when I was General Secretary of Gauteng. People knew my engagement and my involvement. And I saw the lengths then to which people will go in their ambitions for whatever, to destroy other people. And today we see it in full force in our public domain, that we will destroy people to get our own way. And I'd expected the President to protect me. Inasmuch, you know, you saw President Mandela, President Mbeki in particular, even though it was a minister that no one agreed with, the Minister of Health, he defended her. He defended Minister Manuel when he was under fire. But in these instances, the President hung me out to dry.
Between the time when you said to the former president in a meeting with him, in effect, that, or when you refused to appoint Mr. Gama, and then he said, let's wait for the disciplinary process. Your refusal, your attitude to them, did it obtain right throughout as long as Mr. Masego was a candidate, or did it ever change?
No, I did await the outcome of a disciplinary hearing. But once that outcome, once he was found guilty on 3 counts and was dismissed on all 3 counts, The Deputy Minister and myself initiated a process to appoint a new Transnet board. And that was then a year after all of this happened, and it was then towards July, August 2010. And my thinking then was that you don't go and appoint a CEO when this board is already, it's time for it to, for the certain recycling to take place, and then let the board initiate a new search and a new process and let us go ahead. So I never went to appointing someone else or anything like that, no.
Okay, I see the time, Mr. Mokoena, and I'm sure you wanted to draw that to my attention some time back already. We lost about 20 minutes earlier. If it's convenient to the witness and to everybody, I would like us to see if we can carry on until 4:30 to make up for that time. So let me start with Ms. Hogan. Would that be convenient to you?
That's convenient.
Thank you. Mr. Mokoena?
There are some murmuring, Mr. Chair, because always after 4 o'clock we have other witnesses that we have to engage with in preparation for other sittings.
Other members of the legal team can be excused who might need that. Do you have to be there before 4:30?
There's an application that we have to speak about with Mr. Maleka that we supposed to be argued for tomorrow.
Oh.
You would recall. So if I could divide myself into two, Mr. Chair. I'm told that we'll deal with it at 10 o'clock in the evening today. We'll deal with it at 10 o'clock tonight with Mr. Maleka. So we can proceed for now, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you to everybody. Let's continue until 4:30. Thank you, Ms. Hogan.
Ms. Hogan, I posed a question to you earlier on whether were you able to react to those public or to those media reports?
No.
And you said no. May I refer you to page 102? Because there seems to be an article which is attributed to you responding to what was happening at the time so that we can be able to clear up that issue. Page 102.
Yes.
If you look on the second column towards the middle, it says when Gama was suspended. Can you see that?
Yes.
When Gama was suspended on September, I think 1, Hogan said the Transnet board would run the disparity process and inform the shareholder, the government of the outcome and any decision to be taken. Does this quote you correctly?
Yes.
So we did at least react to that one.
Yes, it wasn't in response to
those, yes.
Yeah.
Just want to find. Now, while you're on that page 102, let's go back to 102, and I want you to comment on that. It says that the Public Enterprise Minister, Barbara Hogan, faces crunch time tomorrow after being called to appear before Parliament to explain her handling of the succession process at Transnet and the suggestion of Siyabonga Gama, CEO of Transnet Freight Rail Division. Do you wish to comment about that?
Yes, Fehi Mentor, who was a chairperson then of the Parliamentary Committee on Public Enterprises, summons me to Parliament to please explain why I was not appointed, to explain what was happening with the appointment process. So I went to Parliament.
Are you at liberty to share with us as to what was the outcome of?
Well,
that session?
Well, the ANC members of that committee and other members from other party were of the view that this was a matter that, if not sub judice, this was an internal matter within Transnet, and it should be allowed to continue its processes. So I was not really engaged on that matter.
All right. We know that Mr. Gama did challenge his suspension before the High Court.
Yes, Mr. Gama then challenged his suspension in the High Court, and he lost. He wanted his suspension set aside, and he lost that in the High Court.
May I refer you to page 114?
Mm. 110.
114.
Oh, 114, sorry. Yes, that was a letter, yeah.
And we know also that he brought a challenge. The challenge that we're talking about is the one on page. Starting from page 114. And it goes on up until page 161.
Correct.
And if you go to page 114, Mr. Chair, I'm referring the witness back to page 114. And paragraph 2 captures some of the essence of the application. It says that on the 1st September 2009, Mr. Maharaj, who is the Group Executive, Human Resources of Transnet Limited, took the decision to institute disciplinary proceedings against Mr. Gama and to suspend him on full pay until either the disciplinary process was finalized or until the suspension was lifted. So is that correct, that that was the decision of Mr. Maharaj at the time? Ms. Hogan? Yes.
Well, Mr. Mantash, I think,
Maharaj.
was concerned that he'd been suspended.
Yes, but I'm referring to paragraph 2.
Maharaj, oh. Yes.
Are you on page 114? Yes, I'm saying that in relation to paragraph 2.
Yes.
That decision to suspend and to discipline Mr. Gama was the decision which was made at the time by Mr. Maharaj, according to the papers.
Yes.
So, Mr. Gama had not been suspended by the board. The decision to suspend him had been taken by Mr. Maharaj. Or is there something that you would not have known?
Let me just remember this.
This judgment of the High Court by Judge Spilk suggests that in terms of the papers that were placed before the High Court,
yes,
that decision seems to have been taken by Mr. Maharaj.
Yes, there was a whole... Mr. Gama contested the authority of Mr. Maharaj to conduct the disciplinary processes. Although the board had appointed Mr. Wells to follow up, and Mr. Wells in turn had conferred the authority to conduct the process onto Mr. Haraj, given the controversies that were out in the public domain about Mr. Wells. And that was one of the issues about the process that Mr. Gama was contesting.
And it was also dealing with the delegated powers, whether they correctly
had the
delegated
powers. And he did have it, yeah.
Yes, and one can see that from paragraph 3 of the judgment, Mr. Chair, page 115, which provides that Mr. Maharaj's decision are challenged in proceedings brought by way of application before this court. They are challenged on the grounds that the current acting group chief executive of Transnet, Mr. Wells, could not delegate his admitted authority in such matters to Mr. Maharaj. The applicant contends that only the full board of Transnet could take the decision to bring disciplinary proceedings against him or authorize his suspension. Those were the issues which were crystallized before the High Court.
Yes.
And, Mr. Chair, for completeness, you can also see that from paragraph 5 on page 116, which provides that the factual basis underpinning the legal challenge is that Mr. Wells was precluded from delegating the decision-making power to bring disciplinary proceedings against Mr. Gama, or to suspend him by reason of Mr. Gama's own accusations against Mr. Wells, and that Mr. Wells' alleged involvement in the process continued to have an influence over the board and did assert itself over one of the board's appointed subcommittees. In short, Mr. Wells' involvement in the process, however, tangential, rendered the entire process tainted. That was the essence of the application.
Yes, that was the essence of the application.
And reference is also made on paragraph 6 to the extract of the replying affidavit of Mr. Gama in order to ventilate the challenge that was before the High Court. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yes. Now, this matter was fully ventilated before the High Court, and may I refer you to page 161. The concluding paragraph starts from page 160 by the judge, by the Honorable Judge. Can you see? Ms. Hogan, are you still with me?
Yes.
If you can speak into the mic when you
Yes, I am.
provide
Sorry.
answers, that will
Been a long
help.
day, yeah?
We are just about to finalize, Ms. Hogan, for the day. So page 160, paragraph 118 to paragraph 120 summarizes the conclusions of the judge, and ultimately the order that was made is to be found on page 161, paragraph 121, and it reads as follows: accordingly make the following order. I accordingly make the following order. The application is dismissed with cost, including the cost of the first to the third respondent, and of the fourth to the 13th respondents, including the 10th and excluding the 10th and the 11th respondents, such cost to include the cost of to cancel, something which we like to hear as cancel when we win. So that is correct?
Correct.
Yes. Now we know that flowing from there, the challenge by Mr. Gama did not succeed before the High Court.
Yes. And the High Court also found no evidence of bias against Mr. Gama.
Yes. Now, may I refer you to, just want to follow the note. Yes, Mr. Gama was ultimately dismissed by Transnet subsequent to a disciplinary process that was undertaken.
Correct.
Yes. May I refer you to Annex J?
Page?
What page?
Page 162.
162. Yes. On there.
And these are the findings in the disciplinary hearing against Mr. Gama. Ms. Hogan?
Correct. It was an arbitration process according to the,
Yes.
the thing. It was an arbitration process, yeah.
May I refer you to page 359?
Yes.
And that is where you'll find the conclusions and the summary of the findings by Advocate D.M. Anthrobas, SC, who was the chair of the disciplinary inquiry.
Correct.
And at paragraph 435, he says that I understand that these findings are in the nature of a recommendation to Transnet. In summary, and for reasons fully set out above, I find Gama guilty of misconduct on charges 1, 2, and 4. And this is in line with what you've testified, that he was found guilty on 3 charges.
Yes.
And on paragraph 436, it says that these findings have dealt only with the merits of the misconduct charges. The issue of what sanction ought to be imposed in consequence of the findings of misconduct, which have now been made, is to be considered under Transnet Disciplinary Code and Procedure in a separate proceedings, as was the arrangement which was made with the parties at the close of the previous hearings.
Yes.
Now, what was the ultimate sanction?
The sanction, there was a separate hearings on sanction. They did not, the findings on that sanction, the sanctions imposed, was on the basis of negligence, that Mr. Gama had not applied his mind to the 2 locomotive, to the contracts, and he was dismissed on each of the 3 charges. They said each charge would have warranted a dismissal.
Ms. Hogan, I'm posing the following questions out of my sheer ignorance and for your guidance. Now, the Mr. Gama that you are referring to in your testimony,
Yes.
who you say was fired from Transnet on the 28th of June 2010 as per paragraph, I think, 51 of your witness statement. Is it the same Mr. Gama who was re-employed by Transnet as a group CEO and recently fired by Transnet?
Yes,
Is it the same person?
it's the same person.
Well, he was he was dismissed around June 2010. Is that right? The sanction of dismissal, was it imposed by or decided upon by the board or by an independent person in the same way as the findings of guilt had been decided by an independent advocate?
It was an independent process, yeah.
Do you know whether it was the same advocate who had dealt with?
No. It was a different advocate.
It was a different
that
advocate.
dealt with arbitration,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And from the answer you gave to Mr. Mukwena just now, he was later on appointed, that is Mr. Gama, as Group CEO of Transnet?
Well, Mr. Gama was fired at the end of 2010. I was fired by the president at the end of October 2010.
Yeah. You said end of 2010 for Mr. Gama. Is it not around June 2010?
Mr. Gama was fired on June 2010. I was then fired in October, end of October 2010.
Yes.
Mr. Brian Molefe was then appointed as the CEO of Transnet.
Yes.
In, I think it was January or so.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Gama was reappointed as the CEO of Transnet Freight Rail. It was a couple of months later, on the grounds that they had reviewed the sanction and that they'd had an independent review. I don't quite know what that was about, and that the board felt that the sanction that had been applied was too harsh.
This was now a different board from the one that was in
Yes.
existence during your time.
This was the board that had been appointed by Minister Gigaba, who succeeded me.
In effect, overturning a decision to dismiss Mr. Gama that had been taken by an independent party.
Yes, and he was out of the organization and then
Yes.
reappointed.
Yes, thank you.
You have actually testified on this issue, or it's recorded also on page 13, may I refer you to page 13, paragraph 51. Are you there?
Yes,
You say on paragraph 51, after Mr. Gama had been found guilty, a separate independent hearing on what sanctions should be applied found that the charges were serious enough to warrant dismissal on each charge. Accordingly, on the 28th June 2010, Mr. Gama was fired from Transnet.
correct.
You confirm that?
Yes.
Now, may I refer you to Annexure K on page 360, Mr. Chair?
I'm with you.
Get in there. Now, who prepared this memorandum?
This memorandum was prepared by my department. It was a submission to Cabinet for the appointment of a new board to Transnet.
And I see that on page 365, if you can go there.
Yes,
You signed that memorandum on the
Yes.
27th October 2010.
yes, yeah.
What was the purpose of this memorandum?
The memorandum was to appoint non-executive directors to the Transnet board.
And what happened to this memorandum ultimately, to Annexure K?
Well,
Was it ever discussed by Cabinet?
once again, the Cabinet Secretariat, when I put this into the process, the 27th wasn't the first date. The Cabinet Secretariat said the President wants to speak to you about this. So we had a telephonic conversation about that. He wanted the name of 2 chairpersons, not 1. And he wanted the CVs.
I'm sorry, I think I missed something. Who is he?
The President. So the Cabinet Secretariat, when I was processing this memo for the appointment of Transnet directors,
This is connecting with your earlier evidence that around July, the then president had asked you to give him 3 names. So this is connecting with that.
well, no, this is the following year. It's
Oh.
1 year later.
Okay.
So now the President has said, I can't go ahead until Gama's dismissed. Gama's dismissed. I sent the details of the judgment, the entire judgment, to the President, and started processing a Cabinet memorandum for the appointment of a new Transnet board.
Now, this is now post Mr. Gama being dismissed.
Yes.
Yes.
A new Cabinet memorandum. Once again, the Cabinet Secretariat contacts me and says the President would like to discuss this with you. A telephonic conversation takes place, and he wants to see the CVs. He wants the names of 2 chairpersons, and he also wants to see the CVs. I was also processing a cabinet memorandum for the appointment of directors to the board of SAFCO, the forestry company, and he wanted to see the CV of the person that I was recommending for the chairperson of SAFCO. Accordingly, I sent him those CVs, and once again heard nothing. And so on September, and you know, I pointed out again the centrality of Transnet. Once again, on the 10th of September and on the 11th, I sent reminders that I needed to meet with the president. I sent reminders to his office, heard nothing.
May I refer you to page 366, Annexure L?
367.
366.
6, yes. Yes.
So, just to follow on your chronology, you sent the memorandum that you have now spoken about, and subsequent to that, there was no reaction from the president. Then you went on to send what you termed to be a reminder. Is this the one on page 366?
Yes. This is a letter that I sent to the president after our conversation.
And in this letter, you are raising serious issues on governance within the Transnet. Do you agree?
Yeah. Transnet needs. The AGM is coming up again. The last AGM, we weren't able to appoint anyone. We can't go a second year now without appointing. And I point out the importance of the Transnet, to the company, and I say then to confirm, in respect of the position of the chairperson, where he had asked for several names, I raised the 2 candidates and I gave him the names, and both of their CVs are attached.
Ms. Hogan, may I suggest, because there are quite important issues which you have stated in this letter, may I suggest that you read these paragraphs,
okay,
in order for one to appreciate the serious issues that you are conveying to the president in the time,
yes,
and the importance of appointing the board at the time,
yeah,
having regard to your evidence that it was now over a year that no appointments were made in appropriate positions.
Yes, I convey that to the president.
Can you please read this?
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry. Mr. Mkwena, it is about 4:30. If we are going to go into tomorrow, I'm hoping you are still available, Ms. Hogan.
Yeah.
I'm quite amenable if that's an important point that we adjourn and we start with that point tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that fine?
That's appropriate. We may adjourn.
Because otherwise we go beyond 4:30. All right, then we are going to adjourn at this stage, and we will resume tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. So if you will be here again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We adjourn.
Thanks.
All right.